What would you do, if the person you once loved didn't recognize you anymore? The train hissed to a stop like it was sighing for her, Julia Hart. 10 years gone, and now, standing on the same platform she left from in tears, she wasn't sure if the lump in her throat was from fear, guilt, or both. It was late autumn in Brooksville, the kind of small town that always felt stuck in time. The trees were ablaze with reds and oranges, but the air was stiff with quiet. Too quiet. She clutched her coat tighter and took her first step back home. Every house she passed looked familiar, but like faces from a dream. She half expected the ghosts of her past to lean out the windows, judging her silently. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, she whispered to herself, forcing a dry laugh. That's what her favorite podcast host always said before launching into someone else's messy story. But this? This wasn't someone else's. This was hers. And she wasn't ready for it. The road to the house felt shorter than she remembered, and longer in all the wrong ways. As her boots crunched over the fallen leaves, memories hit her in waves, some soft, others violent. The first time she met David on that very sidewalk. The snowball fight that turned into a kiss. The night she ran out that door, with nothing but a duffel and a breaking heart. And now, here it was. The house. It hadn't changed much. Same blue paint, peeling just a little more. Same white swing on the porch, swaying even though there was no wind. Julia stood frozen at the gate, her fingers resting on the cold metal. Would he open the door? Would Anna run into her arms like a scene from a movie? Or would they just stare at her like she was a stranger? The door creaked open before she could knock. He stood there. David. But not the David she remembered. This man looked older, yes, but it wasn't the wrinkles or the graying hair that struck her. It was his eyes. Cold. Guarded. And unfamiliar. Julia, he said. Not a question. Not a cry. Just a statement. A fact. I wasn't sure if you still lived here, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. I do. Silence fell. Not awkward. Not angry. Just, hollow. I thought about writing, she said. You didn't. She nodded. I know. Behind him, a girl peeked from the hallway. 13. Same eyes. Same cheekbones. Julia's breath caught. Anna. The girl didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared. David stepped slightly in front of her, like a shield. She's not ready, he said. Julia's heart cracked, but she understood. I'm not here to take her away. I needed to come back. To what? David asked. There's nothing left here for you. The words sliced through her, but she didn't flinch. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. None of the versions ever prepared her for this. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just want a chance to explain. David looked her over, like trying to decide if she was real. Or if she deserved the courtesy of being real. He stepped aside. You can come in, he said. But don't expect a welcome home party. Inside, everything was cleaner than she remembered. Sparsely decorated, but with warmth in the details. A photo of Anna in a soccer uniform. A wall calendar with parent-teacher circled in red. A mug on the table that read number 1 Dad. Her chest tightened. You did a good job, she said, nodding toward the photos. David didn't respond. He simply walked into the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat at the table in silence. It wasn't that they had nothing to say. It was that everything they wanted to say weighed too much to lift. She finally broke it. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. He looked up, deadpan. Then why? Her mouth opened, but no words came. Not yet. David, she said, steadying herself. I broke. I didn't know how to fix it. And I didn't want you to see me like that. I thought, leaving was protecting you. He laughed. Not kindly. Protecting me? You disappeared. You vanished from your daughter's life. You think that protected us? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I know. I was wrong. He stood. You're 10 years too late to say that. Julia stayed seated. Still. But I'm here now. He looked at her for a long moment. And something flickered, briefly, in his eyes. Not forgiveness. Not love. But maybe, curiosity. From the hallway, Anna's voice rang out. Is she staying? Julia turned. Only if that's okay with you. Anna's gaze was sharp. Too sharp for a 13-year-old. We don't know you, she said. And Julia nodded. Then I guess I'll have to earn that. David didn't argue. He didn't stop her as she grabbed her bag and stepped into the guest room. As she unpacked, she whispered to herself. What happens when you leave everything behind? The real question was, what happens when you try to pick it back up? The room smelled like cedarwood and forgotten memories. Julia sat on the edge of the twin bed, the same one she had used years ago as a makeshift guest bed when her mother visited. Now it was hers. Again. A temporary space in the home she used to own. A guest in her own past. The silence was too loud, and the walls too still. Every creak in the floorboard felt like a judgment. She stared at her reflection in the small vanity mirror across from her. There were new lines on her face. Her eyes, once always described as hopeful, now looked like they'd seen too much. She opened her journal, flipping to a blank page. But her hand wouldn't move. The words wouldn't come. So instead, she closed her eyes, and remembered. 10 years earlier. It had been raining that night. Brooksville didn't get many storms, but that night the heavens opened up like they were screaming with her. Julia sat on the floor of the bathroom, knees pulled to her chest, drenched in tears and sweat. The pregnancy test box lay discarded in the trash, its contents giving her the news that should have brought joy. But she didn't feel joy. She felt nothing. Or worse, everything all at once. David had been in the nursery, painting the wall a soft yellow, humming an old Beatles song under his breath. She hadn't told him yet. About the miscarriage a month ago. About the spiraling thoughts. About the shame that wrapped around her throat like a noose. She wanted to be happy. She wanted to feel excited. But all she felt was like she was drowning. When he came in and found her on the floor, she had tried to smile. I'm okay, she said. Just tired. But he had seen through it. Julia, what's going on? That was the moment, the one she replayed the most. She could have told him. She could have collapsed into his arms and let it all out. But she didn't. Instead, she stood up, wiped her face, and said, I need air. And just like that, she walked out the door. With nothing but her purse, her ID, and a wad of cash she had stashed for emergencies. That night, she didn't run to anyone. She just ran. Now, sitting in the guest room, she clenched her jaw. I should have told him, she whispered aloud. But hindsight is cruel. It's too clear, too neat. Life isn't. A knock at the door pulled her out of the memory. It opened slightly, and Anna peeked in. Still cautious. Still distant. I forgot my charger in here, Anna mumbled. Julia stood quickly. Of course. Come in. Anna walked in without eye contact. She grabbed the charger from the nightstand, then paused, her back still turned. Did you really just leave? The girl asked, her voice sharp but uncertain. Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. Yes. Why? There it was. The question she knew would come. The one she still didn't know how to answer perfectly. I was very sick, Anna, she said, her voice soft. Not with something you can see. But up here. She tapped her head. I didn't understand it at the time, and I didn't ask for help when I should've. Anna turned slowly. So, you just left. I thought it was the only way to protect you and your dad. I thought I was the problem, and if I disappeared, things would be better. Anna's eyes flashed with something between anger and heartbreak. Well, they weren't better. She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. Julia stood frozen. Later that night, she heard voices downstairs. Quiet ones. David and Anna talking. She caught snippets. She said she was sick. Shouldn't have left. Not our fault. I just don't trust her. Julia sat in the dark and let their words wash over her. She didn't blame them. How could she? They were right. At midnight, she stepped outside onto the porch. The old swing groaned under her weight. The air was crisp. Still. From the window, she saw David at the kitchen table, sipping tea, staring at nothing. Like he had done this 1,000 nights before. She whispered to the wind, you waited. Even if you didn't want to. Something about that gave her hope. Tomorrow, she would try again. And the day after that. David Hart never thought of himself as a bitter man. He wasn't one for loud outbursts or dramatic scenes. In the 10 years since Julia walked out that door, he hadn't thrown a single plate. Hadn't shouted at the sky. Hadn't written any angry letters, though he had started a few and crumpled them up before the pen reached the second sentence. He just got quiet. The kind of quiet that settles deep in your bones. The kind of quiet that changes you. That morning, he stood in the kitchen with his usual routine. 1 mug, 2 scoops of coffee, splash of milk. The radio played softly in the background, public news station, always. Predictable, steady, safe. He could hear Julia moving around upstairs. Every creak of the floor was like a reminder that things were no longer his version of normal. And yet, a small part of him had wondered for years what he'd say if she ever came back. He thought there'd be yelling. Accusations. Maybe even begging. But when he saw her at the door, all of that melted into one unshakable thought, she left. And no matter what explanation she brought with her, it didn't undo that. David looked over at the fridge where Anna's schedule hung crooked from a magnet shaped like a sunflower. It had been there for years, Julia's favorite flower. He'd never had the heart to throw it out. He poured Anna a glass of juice and tapped lightly on her bedroom door. Time for school, he said. She opened it without a word, her hair still messy from sleep. I know. They moved like clockwork. Quiet brushing of teeth, rustling of backpacks, cereal being poured without comment. Father and daughter, both used to the silence. Comfortable in it. Or at least, adjusted. But this morning, it wasn't the usual silence. It was strained. He noticed the stiffness in Anna's shoulders. The way she avoided his eyes. You okay? He asked as she slipped on her shoes. She talked to me last night, Anna replied. David stiffened. Julia? Anna nodded. She said she was sick. David didn't answer. He didn't want to tell Anna what he really thought. That sick didn't quite cover it. That sick felt like an excuse for abandonment. But still, he bit his tongue. Did you believe her? He asked instead. I don't know, Anna said. She cried. A little. But not like movie crying. Just kind of sad. That hurt more than he expected. He remembered Julia crying. Really crying. The kind where her whole body shook. But that was a lifetime ago. Do you want her to stay? He asked, his voice low. Anna looked up at him, her face unreadable. I don't know that either. After dropping her off at school, David sat in the car for a long while before heading back. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he walked around the block, hands in his jacket pockets, heart heavy. People in Brooksville knew better than to pry, but they noticed things. The way Julia was suddenly back. The way she looked thinner. Tired. Like someone who'd seen more than she'd planned to. As he passed the old bakery on Pine Street, Mrs. Kendrick stepped out. David, she called softly, is it true? He nodded once. Yeah. She's back. A pause. How long's she staying? He shrugged. I don't think even she knows. Mrs. Kendrick gave a tight, sympathetic smile. Well, people change. But some things don't heal just because someone comes back. David nodded again, but didn't say what he was thinking. Back home, Julia was sitting on the porch swing, holding a steaming mug. She looked up when he approached, her expression unsure. Hopeful, maybe. I made coffee, she offered. Didn't know if you'd want any. He nodded and sat on the step beside her, not the swing. He kept a small distance. Enough for them both to breathe. She asked me if I wanted you to stay, he said, eyes straight ahead. Julia's hands trembled slightly on her mug. What did you say? I said I didn't know. Silence again. I don't expect to come back and be forgiven overnight, Julia said softly. Hell, I don't even know if I forgive myself yet. David's jaw clenched. You left a child, Julia. Your child. And me. I know, she whispered. And I live with that every single day. She looked at him then, really looked. But you're not the same either. His eyes narrowed slightly. No. I'm not. There was a weight behind those words that she couldn't quite place. Something buried. Something dark. I had to be two people, he said finally. Father and mother. Soft and strong. Provider and protector. And I wasn't always good at it. You were more than good, she said. He looked at her, the pain raw in his gaze. Don't do that. Do what? Try to compliment your way out of this. That's not how this works. Julia nodded, taking the blow without flinching. I'm just trying to understand what I missed, she said. Who you became. David stood up, brushing his jeans off. You want to know who I became? He looked down at her. I became the man who stopped waiting. That's who. And then he walked inside. Julia sat alone, the mug cooling in her hands. Later that evening, Anna found a photo album shoved behind the TV cabinet. One from before. Before everything changed. She flipped through it silently, birthdays, holidays, baby smiles. She brought it to her room and stared at the faces. Her face. Their faces. One of them was gone for a long time. The other had stayed but changed into someone she didn't quite recognize either. She closed the book, whispered to no one in particular. I don't know which one of you I trust. Julia wasn't looking for it. She had only opened the hallway closet to find an extra pillow. The guest bed was firmer than she remembered, and the years had not made her back more forgiving. But instead of a pillow, her fingers brushed something soft, fabric. An old tote bag, shoved behind a stack of board games. Her name was stitched into the strap in faded pink thread, Julia. She pulled it out slowly, a strange weight in her chest. It was her old work bag, the one she used when she taught art classes at the community center, back when life felt full of potential. The zipper was stuck, as if the past was trying to protect itself. But it gave way with a tug. Inside were dried-out pens, a set of worn watercolors, a crumpled flyer for an art show she never attended, and one small, leather-bound notebook. Her diary. She hadn't even realized she left it behind. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. May 3rd. I feel like I'm disappearing. Like I'm still here, but I'm not being seen. Not really. David tries. He brings me tea, he kisses my forehead. But I can't tell him. How do you say, I don't feel like a person anymore, without sounding ungrateful? I want to scream. I want to run. But I also want to stay. I don't know which version of me is the real one. She stopped reading. That version of her, whoever she was then, was too raw. Too broken. But somehow more honest than anything she'd said out loud in a long time. She kept flipping, even as her hands protested. May 17th. I lost the baby today. I was only 8 weeks along. I didn't even tell David I was pregnant yet. I was going to wait until the second trimester, like they recommend. So now I don't have to tell him anything, right? If I don't say it out loud, maybe it'll stop hurting. Maybe I'll just forget. Isn't that what people do? Move on. Her breath hitched. She'd forgotten she wrote that. Or maybe she'd just buried it too deep. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She pressed the notebook to her chest, curling into herself like the words might bring her some kind of absolution. But they didn't. They just reminded her of how alone she had felt, even when she was still here. There was a soft knock at the door. She scrambled to wipe her eyes. David opened the door halfway, then paused when he saw her. You okay? He asked, cautious. She hesitated before holding up the diary. I found this. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with recognition. I remember that bag, he said. I thought you took it with you. I thought I did too. A long silence passed between them. Were you looking for something? She asked, voice low. No. Just, wanted to make sure you had towels. She nodded. Thank you. He didn't leave. His eyes drifted to the diary again. You wrote in that a lot back then. Every night. You never let me read it. It wasn't because of you, she said quickly. It was because of me. I didn't want you to see the version of me I was trying to hide. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's why I didn't try harder. The word stung, but she didn't blame him. Honesty had edges. I lost the baby, she said suddenly. David blinked. What? 10 years ago. Before I left. I was pregnant. I lost it. I never told you. His face went pale. His mouth opened, then closed again. Jesus, Julia. I thought if I told you, you'd try to fix it. And I didn't want it to be fixed. I wanted it to have never happened. He stepped back like he'd been hit. You think I couldn't handle that? No, she said. I thought I couldn't handle you trying to handle it. I was already falling apart. I didn't want to take you down with me. David leaned against the doorframe, hands clenched at his sides. You didn't take me down, he said. You left me down. Those words settled in the air like dust. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. After he left, Julia stayed in that room for hours. She reread every page. The highs, the baby's first words, the way David would sing off-key just to make her laugh. The lows, spirals of guilt, flashes of numbness, pages where the ink had bled from tears she didn't even remember crying. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, she closed the diary with shaking hands. She finally understood something. She hadn't just left her family. She'd left herself behind, too. The woman in those pages was crying out to be seen. And no one, not even Julia, had been listening. Downstairs, David sat in the kitchen, staring at the calendar. The same one he marked every month with dates that meant nothing anymore. Parent-teacher conferences. Grocery reminders. Soccer games. But 10 years ago, the square for June 21st had been blank. That was the day she left. And he realized he'd never dared to write anything on that day since. In her room, Julia picked up the diary again and turned to the last page. It was blank. Until now. She grabbed a pen and wrote. April 17th, I came back. Not because I'm better. Not because I'm forgiven. But because I'm finally ready to be honest. Even if it breaks me again. She closed the book. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt just a little lighter. Anna Hart didn't cry easily. She'd learned that from her father. He never told her not to cry, but he also never made it seem like a useful thing to do. So she learned to keep her emotions quiet. Neat. Tucked away in a mental drawer marked handle later. When she saw Julia, her mother, standing on the porch just 2 days ago, the drawer nearly burst open. But she didn't cry. She stared. She listened. She filed it all away. Now, sitting in the back row of her 8th grade English class, Anna wasn't hearing a word of what Ms. Garvey was saying. Something about metaphor and point of view. She stared out the window, chewing on the end of her pencil, heart thudding with questions she didn't have the words to ask. What did it mean to have a mom who came back? Could someone be a mother again after choosing not to be one? The thoughts circled her like gnats, annoying and impossible to ignore. Her best friend, Chloe, nudged her under the desk. You okay? She mouthed. Anna gave a small shrug. The international sign for I don't know. Chloe gave her a sympathetic look. Everyone in town had heard by now. Word spread faster than wildfire in Brooksville. The girl whose mom left was now the girl whose mom had come back. But it didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like being handed a puzzle where half the pieces were soaked and torn. That afternoon, Anna walked home instead of taking the bus. She needed air. Time. When she reached the house, she saw Julia sitting on the porch again, painting. A canvas rested on her knees, her brush flicking with a kind of quiet confidence Anna didn't expect. She hadn't remembered her mom being artistic. Julia looked up when she heard footsteps, her face lighting up a little. Hey. Anna gave a small nod but didn't slow her pace. She opened the front door and walked right past. Inside, David looked up from the kitchen table, where he was going through mail. She tried to talk to you again. Anna dropped her bag near the stairs. No. Just said hey. David studied her for a second. You don't have to talk to her if you're not ready. I know. But, he hesitated. You might want to listen. Someday. Anna's brows pinched. Did you listen? He didn't answer right away. I'm trying. Anna thought about that for a moment, then made her way upstairs. That night, she stood in the doorway of the guest room. Julia looked up from the book she was reading. Anna leaned against the frame, arms crossed. I don't remember your voice. Julia's throat tightened. I understand. I was 3 when you left, right? Yeah. Anna nodded slowly. I don't remember your laugh either. Or the way you hugged. Julia sat on the edge of the bed. Would it help if I told you that I remember all of it? Anna didn't answer. I remember how you used to hold your blanket up like a cape and run through the hallway. I remember the way you hated peas, even mashed into your food. I remember the first time you said, Mama, and I cried so hard I had to sit down. Anna looked away. I didn't come back expecting to pick up where we left off, Julia said. I came back because I want to know you now. Who you are. What you love. What you hate. All of it. Anna's voice was quiet. You said you were sick. I was. Are you better now? Julia took a breath. I'm working on it. I still see a therapist. I take medication. And I'm learning not to run anymore. Anna stepped inside the room, slowly. You have to know, she said, that it's not just you who got hurt. I didn't just grow up without a mom. I grew up thinking it was my fault. Julia's heart shattered at the words. No, she said. Never. It was never your fault, Anna. Anna's lip trembled for the first time. I used to ask Dad what I did wrong. If I was too loud. Too messy. If maybe I cried too much and you got tired of me. Julia stood, reaching toward her gently. You were perfect. You were a baby. A beautiful, bright, loving baby. I left because I wasn't okay, not because of anything you did. Anna let the silence stretch for a beat. Then another. And finally, she nodded. Just once. And then she turned and left. Julia sat back down, heart pounding. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. In her room, Anna lay in bed, eyes wide open. She thought of Julia's hands, the way she moved the paintbrush earlier. How she looked calm, even kind of peaceful. And for the first time, she wondered, not about the mother who left, but about the woman who had come back. Maybe there was more to the story. Maybe it was time to start listening. Brooksville wasn't the kind of town you could disappear from quietly. It was small. Too small. The kind of place where the grocery store clerk still called you by name, and the gas station attendant had your birthday memorized because he'd known your dad since Little League. It was the kind of town where the people smiled with their mouths, but held memories like folded secrets tucked behind their eyes. So when Julia Hart walked into town again after 10 years, Brooksville noticed. And Brooksville remembered. The first place she went alone was the grocery store. She didn't have a plan, just needed shampoo and something for dinner. David had work. Anna was at school. She figured she could at least contribute a meal. Something simple. Pasta maybe. But the second she stepped through the sliding glass doors of Fairview Market, she felt it. The air changed. It wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't. The butcher behind the meat counter, Todd, froze halfway through wrapping a steak. His smile faltered just a second too long. The woman near the produce section, Miranda Campbell, glanced up, locked eyes, then turned sharply down another aisle like she'd forgotten something very important and very far away. Julia kept walking, grabbing what she needed with stiff fingers and an iron jaw. She'd braced herself for this. Knew it was coming. But still, it hurt. She had lived here. Loved here. Lost here. Now, she was a ghost haunting her own story. In the checkout line, she placed her items neatly on the belt. The cashier, a young girl named Lily, probably no older than 17, blinked at her. Are you? Julia offered a small, tired smile. Probably, yeah. Lily paused, her voice soft. Your daughter's in my math class. She's smart. Really smart. Julia felt the words hit like a warm breath in cold air. She nodded. Yeah. She is. When Julia left the store, she noticed Miranda Campbell outside by the parking lot, smoking a cigarette. Miranda used to be a friend, at least, the kind you grabbed brunch with once a month to pretend life wasn't unraveling. Now, Miranda just stared. And then, to Julia's surprise, she said, "You look good." Julia raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. Miranda shrugged. Well. You don't look like someone who walked out on her kid. Julia flinched. There it was. The truth, as the town remembered it. At home, she unpacked the groceries in silence. The kitchen looked the same, but the rhythm was different now. She found herself opening the wrong cabinet for plates, reaching for a drawer that no longer held silverware. As she cooked, the pasta bubbling quietly, her mind drifted. She remembered walking through that same grocery store 10 years ago, holding a toddler Anna in one arm, fumbling with coupons in the other. People used to stop her to coo over the baby. Back then, she had still believed she could fake her way into happiness. She was wrong. And Brooksville had never forgotten that she failed. Later that evening, David returned home, briefcase slung over his shoulder, weariness hanging off him like an extra layer of clothing. He raised an eyebrow when he smelled food. "You cooked?" he asked cautiously. Julia wiped her hands on a towel. "Yeah. Just pasta." Anna peeked into the kitchen, then backpedaled. "Smells good," she muttered before heading to her room. David looked at Julia. "Someone stop you at the store?" She gave a dry laugh. "You could say that." He leaned against the doorway. "It'll take time. This town, they don't forget easy. But they do move on eventually." Julia sighed. "I don't want them to forget. I just want them to see who I am now." David was quiet for a long beat. Then he nodded slowly. "That's fair." The next day, she stopped by the community center. It used to be her place, her second home. She hadn't been sure if she was ready to face it, but something in her needed to see what had changed. The receptionist, Nancy, didn't even fake a smile. "Well," she said, folding her arms. "Didn't expect to see you again." Julia stayed calm. "I didn't expect it either." "You here to teach again? Or just visiting your ghosts?" Julia took a deep breath. "I'm here to apologize. For everything. And maybe to volunteer." Nancy scoffed. "You think helping out once a week erases 10 years? "No," Julia said. "But maybe it's a start." Nancy stared at her for a long, uncomfortable second. Then, almost grudgingly, she said, "We could use someone Tuesdays. The younger kids. Finger painting." Julia managed a small smile. "That's a start." That night, Julia sat on the porch swing again, wrapped in a blanket. The stars were out, same as always, but the air felt different. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos she'd saved on a forgotten cloud account. Pictures of baby Anna. Of David smiling on their old back deck. Of her, mid-laugh, hair longer, eyes brighter. She wasn't her anymore. But she wasn't gone. And maybe, just maybe, the town would come to see that too. Eventually. The room smelled like glue sticks and washable paint. Julia stood at the doorway of the community center's art room, a bundle of brushes in one hand, a pack of poster paper in the other. The walls were still covered in mismatched artwork, smiling suns, handprint turkeys, and the occasional glitter explosion. It looked almost exactly like it did 10 years ago. Except this time, she wasn't the teacher everyone loved. She was the woman everyone whispered about. "Miss Julia?" a little voice asked. She turned and saw a boy, 6 or 7, holding a plastic bin of markers nearly as big as his head. "Yeah," she said, kneeling down to his eye level. "What's your name?" "Eli," he said shyly. "Are you gonna be our art lady now?" She smiled. "If you'll have me." He nodded, relieved. "Okay. Just don't let Kendra hog all the glitter." "She always hogs the glitter." Julia chuckled. Noted. The first 10 minutes were chaos. Little fingers grabbing crayons like it was a race, paint smudges already appearing on foreheads and elbows. But as she moved around the tables, something shifted. The kids didn't care who she had been. They only cared that she was here. Present. Engaged. Laughing softly as one girl drew a cat with 3 heads and named it, Princess Death Laser. Julia had forgotten how healing it felt, this messy, joyful noise. Nancy walked by around 20 minutes in, peeking through the window. Julia caught her eye and gave a small wave. Nancy didn't wave back. But she didn't walk away either. After class, Julia stayed late to clean the brushes, humming softly as she scrubbed away flecks of dried paint. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this, doing something with her hands, creating, even if it was just finger painting alongside a kindergartner who swore he was drawing a battle between good and evil in space. As she finished rinsing out the last brush, she heard a voice behind her. "I didn't expect to see you here again." Her heart skipped. She turned slowly. Matt Jennings. Tall, dark hair just beginning to silver, eyes the color of dust and memory. He looked older, sure, but not unfamiliar. They'd worked together back then, co-taught the teen art summer program. They'd even almost shared a kiss once, a memory that now felt distant and strange. "Matt," she said quietly. "Wow. Hey." He gave a soft smile. "You look good." She laughed softly. "That seems to be the town's line for me lately." "I didn't mean it like that." "I know." He stepped into the room, glancing around at the drying racks and spilled water. "You teaching again?" "Just volunteering. Tuesdays. For now." He nodded slowly. "Good. These kids could use someone like you." Julia tilted her head. "That's not exactly the reception I've been getting." He shrugged. "People hold on to what they think they know. But I figure, anyone brave enough to come back deserves a second chance." Her throat tightened. "I didn't come back for redemption," she said. Matt looked at her. "Why did you come back, Julia?" She paused. "I came back for my daughter." Matt let the silence linger for a moment. "How is she?" "Brilliant. Guarded. Angry. Rightfully." He nodded. "I remember when she used to sit in the corner of the art room and eat goldfish crackers like they were currency." "She still does," Julia smiled. They stood in silence, not uncomfortable, just old. Like something familiar worn soft by time. "Well," Matt said, backing toward the door, "if you ever need extra brushes, my room's next door. Tuesdays. 4 o'clock. She smiled. "Thanks." And then he was gone. That night, Julia sat at the kitchen table across from Anna, both eating pasta again, leftovers this time. "I heard you went to the community center," Anna said without looking up. "Yeah. Volunteering." Anna stabbed a piece of penne. "Dad said you used to teach there." "I did." "Why'd you stop?" Julia took a breath. "Because when I left, I didn't think I deserved to keep doing something I loved." Anna finally looked at her. "Do you still think that?" Julia gave a small shake of her head. "Not anymore." Anna didn't reply. But she didn't get up and leave either. It was something. Later, as she sat on the porch swing once more, a text buzzed in her pocket. "Matt Jennings, nice job today. For what it's worth, I think the town will come around." Julia stared at the message. Then typed back. "Julia, one Tuesday at a time." The date crept up like it always did. April 23rd. David didn't mark it on the calendar. He hadn't in years. But every time the month rolled around, he felt it, like an old injury that never quite healed right. And this year, with Julia back, it pressed heavier than ever. He thought maybe she'd forgotten. He thought maybe it wouldn't matter anymore. But when he walked into the kitchen that morning and saw her standing there, frozen in front of the refrigerator, her hand resting on a magnet with Anna's old preschool photo, he knew she hadn't forgotten either. "Morning," he said, clearing his throat. Julia turned, her smile thin, mechanical. "Hey. Coffee?" "Sure." She poured a cup. Passed it over. Their fingers brushed, and both of them pretended not to notice. "I didn't know if," she began, but trailed off. David didn't make her finish. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered." They stood in silence for a beat too long. Then Julia broke it. "Do you think she knows?" David took a sip of coffee. "No. She was 4. I never told her. I used to think that was protecting her. Maybe it was, he said. Or maybe we just didn't know how to explain it. Later that afternoon, Anna came home to find the living room unusually quiet. The air felt thick, like someone had pressed pause on the house. She found David in the garage, sorting through a box labeled seasonal. Inside were tangled Christmas lights, a cracked snow globe, and a few things that didn't belong, like an old gift bag with faded tissue paper still inside. "What's this?" she asked, pulling it out. David froze. Anna reached into the bag and pulled out a small box, still wrapped in pink paper, with a sticker that read Happy 4th Birthday. There was no name on the tag. "Dad?" she asked slowly. He took the box gently from her hands, staring at it like it might explode. That was for someone who never got to open it. Anna frowned. "What do you mean?" David hesitated. "Too long." "Tell me," Anna said. So he did. She sat on the porch swing for a long time after. Julia came out later, a blanket over her shoulders. She sat beside her daughter but didn't speak right away. Just watched the sky fade from gold to navy. "Dad told me about the baby," Anna finally said. Julia inhaled sharply. "I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know when." Anna nodded. "It's weird. I'm angry, but not for the reason I thought I'd be." Julia turned. "Why are you angry?" "Because I didn't know I was supposed to be sad today," Anna said. "I didn't know I had someone to miss." Tears pricked Julia's eyes. She reached over, gently taking Anna's hand. "I miss them too," she whispered. Anna let the silence stretch for a while, then asked, "Was it a girl or boy?" "I never found out," Julia said. "I didn't let them tell me." They sat there in the fading light, hand in hand. And though neither of them said it, they both knew something had shifted. Not healed, exactly, but cracked open. A little light was getting through. That night, David pulled out the old gift box again. He unwrapped it slowly, 10 years late, and opened it to find a small, hand-sewn stuffed rabbit. Julia had made it. He held it quietly for a long time, before gently placing it on the top shelf of the hallway closet. Not buried. Not gone. Just remembered. It was a Friday night when the text arrived. "Matt Jennings, hey, we're having a few people over for dinner tonight. Thought you might want to join. Anna, too, of course. We're grilling out. Let me know if you can make it." Julia stared at the message for a long time, as if the words might change if she looked at them long enough. The idea of a few people over felt so normal. So casual. And she hadn't done normal in a very long time. It was tempting. The invitation was kind, and maybe that was enough to consider it. But there was something else nagging at her. The fact that Matt was inviting them both, and her, specifically. He didn't have to do that. The town didn't have to do that. A part of her wanted to say no. To retreat. To go back to the comfort of silence and isolation. But another part, a quieter part, whispered that maybe it was time to stop running. At dinner, Matt's backyard was exactly how she remembered it. The air smelled like charcoal and fresh-cut grass. The sound of laughter came from the little fire pit at the edge of the yard, where a group of teenagers, none of whom Julia recognized, were telling stories and roasting marshmallows. David and Anna had been silent in the car ride over. Neither of them spoke of why they hadn't said no. The tension sat in the back seat with them. And now, standing here in Matt's backyard, Julia felt the weight of it all. The looks, the murmurs, the unspoken history hanging like fog. The smile she offered to Matt's wife, Christine, felt fragile. The warm greeting from Matt's sister, Claire, was polite but distant. "Julia. You look good," Christine said, her voice overly cheerful, as if trying too hard to make the words come out smoothly. "Thanks," Julia replied, offering a smile. "It's been a while." "It has. It's nice to see you again." Matt said. "Anna's here, too." "She's with David over by the grill," Julia said, trying to sound casual. "I'm sure they're probably getting annoyed with the teenage chatter." Christine laughed lightly, but the way her gaze flickered to Matt made Julia feel like she'd stepped into a moment that wasn't quite hers. Matt came over soon after, holding a drink in one hand and a plate of grilled vegetables in the other. "Anna's with the kids," he said. "David's talking shop with my brother-in-law." "You okay?" Julia nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was. "Yeah. It's a lot. More than I expected, I think." He gave her a knowing look. "It's always like that the first time back. But you're doing fine. Trust me." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But the way the town looked at her, how they always looked at her, like she was an outsider in her own life, it was hard to shake. "I keep wondering if it's enough, you know." "If this is enough," she said, voice quiet. Matt sat next to her. "It's more than enough. It's about doing the work. Not rushing it." Before she could respond, David wandered over, giving her a half-smile. "The burgers are good. And the kids are, well, the kids." Julia raised an eyebrow. "You sound thrilled." "I think I'm out of practice with socializing," he admitted, sitting down next to her. "Too many years of just us." The night went on like that, slow, heavy, yet somehow comforting in its mundanity. Julia watched the kids laugh around the fire pit, feeling that mix of longing and relief. A part of her missed the simplicity of family moments, the times before everything got so complicated. But another part of her felt like she wasn't allowed to have those moments. Not after what she'd done. As the evening wore on, she found herself talking with Claire, Matt's sister, who had grown up with the same town gossip that Julia had once tried to avoid. "So, you're back for good?" Claire asked, not unkindly, but there was an edge to her tone. "I'm not sure yet," Julia answered honestly. "But I'm not leaving again." That's good," Claire said, but there was an uncomfortable pause. "I think the hardest part, Julia, is that the town hasn't moved on. You know. They still see you the way you were when you left." "The way you left?" Julia winced. I know it's not easy," Claire added, a little softer. "I'm just saying, they're still looking for answers. They're waiting for you to make things right. The thing is, they can't move forward until you do." Julia nodded, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just the town. It wasn't just the looks or the whispered words. It was her, too. It was the guilt she carried. The parts of herself she'd never made peace with. Later, when it was time to leave, the night felt like a dream. A fleeting moment. A fragile attempt at rebuilding something that was never truly whole. Julia and David said their goodbyes, and Anna wandered over to the car, silent as always. The drive home was just as quiet. When they got inside, Julia closed the door and turned to David. She could see the tiredness in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped with the weight of years of unspoken words. "That went better than I expected," she said, breaking the silence. David just nodded. "Yeah. It's like, we're moving through the motions. But it feels like we're still stuck somewhere." Julia stepped closer to him. "We're not stuck," she whispered, feeling a flicker of hope. "We're just taking the next step." David looked at her, the first spark of something between them, something like understanding. Maybe even healing. He gave her a small smile. One step at a time. The town hall meeting was held on the second Tuesday of every month. It was where people gathered to discuss everything from zoning laws to the latest gossip about the high school football team. It was the heartbeat of the town, where everything important, and not so important, got decided. Julia had never really cared for it. Before she left, she had attended a few times, but the monotony of it all had always felt suffocating. That was before, though. Before she had become the town's prodigal daughter. Tonight, though, the stakes were higher. Julia had been hearing whispers for weeks now, first from the grocery store cashier, then from the woman who ran the local diner. "Julia's back," they would say, followed by a knowing glance or an uncomfortable pause. People were talking, and she couldn't escape the reality of it anymore. The townspeople were waiting for something from her, and tonight was the night it would all come to a head. David had been hesitant when she said she'd go to the meeting. "It's not like they're gonna forgive you just because you show up," he'd warned. "I don't expect them to," she'd replied, her voice steady but tired. "But I can't hide forever." And so, here she was, standing outside the town hall building. The faint hum of voices filtered through the open doors. The building was old, like everything in this town, a place with history, but also a place that was stuck in time. David was standing beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes forward. He was less certain about her decision to confront the town, but he'd come, just like always. For her. For Anna. And maybe even for himself. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Julia had barely stepped inside when the room seemed to shift. People were talking in hushed tones, stealing glances at her from the corners of their eyes. It was like a ripple had spread through the crowd, and she was the epicenter. Matt was already there, standing near the back of the room, looking calm but alert. His eyes met hers as she walked in, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Julia," came the familiar voice of her old friend, Sharon. She was standing at the front of the room, organizing papers. Her voice was warm, but there was something strained about her smile. "Sharon," Julia greeted, forcing a smile herself. "Thanks for coming. It's good to see you again." Julia glanced around the room. The chairs were filled with familiar faces, neighbors, old classmates, people she hadn't thought about in years. People she'd once known, but now felt like strangers. Her gaze flickered over to a few more people, then froze on one woman in particular. It was Rachel Miller, the woman who had always been Julia's closest friend back then. But now, she was seated near the front of the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The tension in her expression was enough to make Julia's stomach drop. Rachel's eyes were cold. The meeting started, and Julia stayed in the back, barely listening as the town officials droned on about roadwork and park renovations. Her mind kept circling back to Rachel, to the years of friendship they'd shared before everything had unraveled. The years Rachel had been there for her, and then the years she hadn't. Julia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't intended to speak tonight. She hadn't planned on confronting anyone. But something had shifted inside her. Something that made her feel like the silence was becoming unbearable. Finally, after an hour of mundane discussion, the meeting took a turn. The room fell silent as Mayor Henderson, who had known Julia since she was a child, stood up at the front. "We need to address something important tonight," he said, his voice gruff. "And it's been a long time coming." Julia's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. He paused for a moment, scanning the room. Then he turned to her. "Julia," the mayor said, his voice heavy with years of unresolved tension. "You've been gone a long time. And while the town is glad to see you back, there's something we need to talk about. Something we need you to explain." Julia felt every eye in the room land on her, every gaze sharp with expectation. The weight of it was almost suffocating. She stood, slowly, her palms sweaty against her sides. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I know there's a lot of questions. I don't have all the answers. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Julia continued, her eyes scanning the room. "I know I left, without explanation. I know it hurt people. And I can't undo that. But I've been living with this guilt for a long time. And I've been working through it, one step at a time. She paused, her heart racing. And I can't fix everything. But I'm here. And I'll do whatever I can to make things right. There was a beat of silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, Rachel stood up. She was taller than Julia remembered, her face more defined by the years that had passed. But her eyes, those eyes, were just as sharp as ever. You think that's enough? Rachel's voice cut through the stillness. Her words weren't loud, but they felt like a slap. You think showing up is enough? You think it's enough to say, I'm sorry, and expect us all to forget? Julia flinched, but she didn't look away. She hadn't expected an easy ride, but this felt harder than anything she had imagined. No, she said softly. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm here to stay. That I can earn your trust again. Rachel took a step forward, her gaze never wavering. Some things, they don't just get forgiven. They change you. They change all of us. Julia swallowed hard, her throat dry. I know. And I'm sorry. There was another long silence. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, but Julia stood her ground. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her voice softer now, but still with that same sharp edge. We'll see, won't we? As the meeting finally wrapped up, Julia could feel the weight of the room lift slightly. The townspeople weren't all on her side, not yet, at least, but something had shifted. She hadn't expected immediate forgiveness, but she'd wanted them to see that she was trying. That she was ready to face the consequences of her past. As she left the meeting, David was waiting for her outside, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with those steady eyes that always seemed to understand her even when she couldn't understand herself. How'd it go? He finally asked. Julia sighed. It wasn't easy. But it was necessary. David nodded. One step at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed the town hall meeting were some of the hardest Julia had faced since her return. The air felt heavier than usual, as though the town was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. People still avoided eye contact when they saw her in the grocery store or on the street, though a few had begun to offer hesitant smiles. But the real weight wasn't from the stares, it was from the unspoken words, the things left unsaid that hung between her and everyone else. The hardest part, though, was David. Julia had hoped that after the meeting, after the tension had been aired out in the open, things might settle between them. But it hadn't. David was still distant, still wrapped in the same walls he had built years ago when she walked out of their lives. She could feel it every time he looked at her, like he was waiting for something, anything, to prove that he hadn't been wrong about trusting her. It had been 2 weeks since the meeting, and the silence between them was growing unbearable. On a Saturday afternoon, Julia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. She could hear Anna in the living room, the sound of her laughter floating through the walls, and for a moment, it felt like everything could be normal again. But the cracks were still there, underneath the surface. The things that had never been said. The things that Julia had kept buried for far too long. She set the brush down, taking a deep breath. David hadn't said much about what happened at the town hall meeting. He hadn't even asked how Julia felt afterward, hadn't pressed for more details. He had simply nodded, like he always did, and went about his day. That was the pattern, the routine. But something in Julia snapped that afternoon. She couldn't go on like this anymore, not with him pretending that everything was fine, not with herself pretending that she was okay with the silence. When she walked into the living room, Anna was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Julia paused for a moment, watching her daughter, but her thoughts were elsewhere. David was sitting across from her, eyes on the TV, but his mind clearly somewhere else. Julia could feel it. The coldness, the space between them, thickening with each passing day. "David," Julia said, her voice steady but tight. "We need to talk." He looked up from the TV, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's going on?" "I'm tired of pretending," Julia said, taking a deep breath. "I'm tired of the silence." David's gaze shifted. He knew exactly what she was talking about. He shifted in his seat but didn't speak. He wasn't ready. "Not yet." "Do you think it's easy for me?" Julia continued, frustration creeping into her voice. "Do you think that just because I'm here now, everything is magically fixed?" David's jaw tightened, and he stood up, crossing his arms over his chest. "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" Julia shot back, her voice rising. "What do you want from me, David?" He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "I want you to stop expecting things to change overnight. I want you to understand that I can't just forgive everything that happened. You left us. You left." "I know," Julia whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I did." Anna, who had been listening quietly from the couch, stood up. "Mom, you don't have to explain it to me. I know what you've been through." Julia looked at her daughter, her heart aching. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I left, everything would somehow make sense. But I was wrong." David's eyes softened for a moment. "It's not just about you, Julia. It's about what you did to Anna. What you did to me." Julia flinched. It wasn't the first time he had said it. And it never got any easier to hear. "I didn't know how to be what you needed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to be the person you wanted me to be, and I thought that maybe leaving would solve everything. But I was wrong. And I'm sorry." David ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "It's not just about saying sorry, Julia. It's about showing it. It's about doing the work, not just telling us you're sorry and expecting us to move on. You don't get to just come back after all this time and pretend that everything can just go back to the way it was." Julia nodded slowly, feeling the sting of his words. "I know. I don't expect that. But I am trying, David. I'm really trying." She looked over at Anna, who was standing quietly beside the couch, watching them both with wide eyes. "I don't know if I can fix what I've done," Julia continued, her voice shaky. "But I need you to believe that I'm not the same person I was back then. I've changed. I want to be here. For you. For Anna." David didn't respond right away. He just stood there, his arms still crossed, his eyes searching hers. Julia could see the walls he had built around himself, walls that had been there for years. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, and it was going to take time for him to tear those walls down. Finally, David exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not right away. It's going to take time, Julia. Time I'm not sure I have the patience for." Julia nodded, her throat tight. "I understand." She turned to Anna, whose expression had softened. Anna didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Julia could see it in her daughter's eyes, the quiet understanding, the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. That night, Julia lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had opened up to David, more than she ever had before. She had finally said the things that needed to be said. But was it enough? The silence between them was still there, still heavy. She didn't know how long it would take to heal the wounds, to rebuild what they once had. But she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when there was still so much to fight for. Julia had always believed in second chances. But as the days passed after her conversation with David, she started to wonder if there were parts of life that were beyond repair. Her heart ached from the constant push and pull between wanting to make things right and the overwhelming weight of the past. The scars that she had left, the pain that still lingered in the air, were more than she could have ever anticipated. And then there was the phone call. It had come on a Wednesday morning, when the sun had barely risen, and the house was still quiet. Julia had just finished making coffee when her phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, unlike anything she had ever seen before. At first, she thought it was a wrong number or some random solicitation. But something told her to answer. "Hello? Julia?" The voice on the other end was soft, almost tentative, but it carried a weight that Julia recognized immediately. It was Rachel. Julia's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard from Rachel in years, not since the last time they had spoken in person, before everything had fallen apart. "Rachel," Julia replied, the word feeling foreign in her mouth, like a name she hadn't spoken in a lifetime. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" There was a long pause before Rachel spoke again, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. In person. It's important." Julia's heart began to race. She hadn't seen Rachel in years, but the years didn't matter. Not when the memories of their friendship still haunted her, not when the bitterness of betrayal still stung. But something in Rachel's voice made Julia think that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "When?" Julia asked, already feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on her chest. "Tonight," Rachel said, and then added, almost too quickly, "I'll be at the old cafe, the one by the lake. 7 o'clock. Before Julia could say anything else, Rachel hung up. Julia stood in the kitchen for a few moments, staring at the phone in her hand. What could this be about? After everything that had happened, after all the years of silence and tension, why would Rachel want to talk now? She felt a strange mix of dread and curiosity tugging at her chest. The old cafe by the lake was a place she hadn't set foot in since the day she left town. It had always been their place, hers and Rachel's. A quiet, cozy spot where they would talk for hours, share dreams, laugh about the dumbest things. But that was before. Before the betrayal, before Julia had turned her back on everything she had known. By the time evening came, Julia was a mess of nerves and anticipation. She told David she would be gone for a while, that she needed to clear her head. He didn't ask where she was going or who she was meeting. He was still distant, still carrying the weight of their last conversation like an anchor. But Julia didn't need to explain. She couldn't explain. Not yet. As she pulled into the parking lot of the cafe, she saw Rachel's car parked by the water, just as she had said. The lake glistened under the setting sun, the soft waves crashing gently against the shore. It should have been peaceful, but all Julia could feel was the tension in her gut. She stepped out of her car, taking a deep breath before walking toward the cafe. The door chimed as she entered, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries filling her nostrils. It was exactly as she remembered it, cozy, intimate, and comforting. But tonight, it felt like a stage, the lights too bright, the air too thick. And there, sitting at a corner table, was Rachel. Rachel didn't look much different. Her hair was a little longer, and her face had softened with time. But there was a sadness in her eyes that Julia hadn't seen before. It made Julia's chest tighten with something she couldn't name, regret, perhaps, or longing. She wasn't sure. Rachel stood up as Julia approached, her expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. Julia nodded, sitting down at the table across from her. "Of course. You said it was important." Rachel's lips parted as if she was going to say something but hesitated. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. After a long moment, she finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About everything that happened, with us." Julia swallowed hard. She had been doing the same thing. How could she not? The past had been with her for so long, weighing her down, shaping every decision she made. Do you ever wonder, Rachel continued, if maybe it was never about the leaving? Maybe it was about what you left behind? Julia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, if she was ready to hear what Rachel had been holding on to for all these years. But there was something about Rachel's voice that made Julia feel like she needed to know. She owed it to herself to hear what her old friend had to say. I don't know what you mean, Julia admitted softly, her hands resting on the table, clenched in nervous anticipation. Rachel sighed deeply, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I mean, Julia. I never understood why you left so suddenly. I don't think any of us did. But it wasn't just about you leaving David, or Anna, or the town. It was about you leaving me, too. It was like, you disappeared. Without a word. Without an explanation. Julia's throat tightened. She had heard the words before, in her own mind, but hearing them out loud, spoken with such pain, was a different experience altogether. I didn't know how to stay, Julia whispered. I didn't know how to be who everyone needed me to be. I thought if I just ran, if I just disappeared, maybe I could figure it out. But I was wrong. I know that now. Rachel's eyes softened. She placed her coffee cup down and reached for Julia's hand. I'm not asking for you to explain yourself. I just needed you to know. I needed to understand why. I've carried that anger for so long, Julia. And I've hated myself for it. Because even though you left, I never stopped caring. Julia's breath hitched in her chest. The rawness in Rachel's words was too much, too real. She had never realized how deep the hurt went. How much Rachel had been affected by her absence. I've never stopped caring either, Julia said quietly, her voice cracking. I just didn't know how to make it right. For the first time in years, the walls between them began to crumble. It wasn't a sudden shift, not a quick fix. But as the conversation went on, they started to see each other again. Not as the women who had been torn apart by time, but as the friends they had once been. The hurt didn't vanish. It didn't disappear. But it began to heal. The conversation with Rachel lingered in Julia's mind long after she left the cafe. As she drove home, the quiet hum of the engine was almost drowned out by the swirl of thoughts in her head. She had gone to the cafe expecting something, but she hadn't expected the weight of the past to land so heavily on her shoulders. Rachel's words echoed in her ears, I never stopped caring. It was a sentiment that Julia had feared would never be said. She had spent so many years running from the people who mattered most to her, and now, here she was, trying to reconcile the years lost. As she pulled into the driveway, she glanced up at the house. The familiar sight of the porch, the lights glowing softly from inside, it should have felt like home. But instead, it felt like a place she was still learning to return to. David had already gone to bed when Julia arrived. She knew he would be asleep. He had always been an early riser, and tonight was no exception. His absence in the house, however, made everything seem more distant. She sat on the edge of their bed, the covers still warm from where he had slept. Her mind was swirling, but all she could do was stare into the dark room. In the quiet, Julia's emotions felt louder than ever. She had spoken to Rachel, she had acknowledged the hurt that had been left behind, and now she had to face the hardest part, deciding what to do next. It was no longer just about her relationship with David. It wasn't just about her guilt over leaving him or Anna or even her town behind. It was about her, Julia. Who had she become in all this time? What kind of woman had she become in the 10 years of silence? The reflection in the mirror was a stranger sometimes, someone who had grown and changed, but whose past actions had left deep scars. She wanted to be the person who could fix things, but deep down, Julia knew that some things couldn't be fixed with apologies alone. The damage had been done. The only thing she could do now was choose whether to face it head-on or run from it once again. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. A text message from Rachel. Julia hesitated, not sure if she was ready to revisit their conversation from earlier. We've both made mistakes, Julia. But that doesn't mean we can't start again. I think it's time we both turn the page. Julia stared at the words, her heart heavy. Turning the page. That's what she needed to do, start over. But was she ready to truly turn the page with David, with Anna, with herself? The decision weighed on her. The next morning, Julia woke to the sound of the coffee machine brewing. The house was still quiet, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly still. She went through the motions, making breakfast for Anna, sorting through the mail, preparing for the day. But her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts were tangled up in the conversation with Rachel and the uncertainty of what she needed to do next. As she walked into the kitchen, she found Anna sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, but her expression was thoughtful. "Mom," Anna said, setting the phone down. "Do you think things can ever really go back to the way they were?" Julia froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was a question she had been asking herself for weeks, but hearing it from Anna was another matter altogether. "What do you mean, honey?" Julia asked, her voice soft. "I don't know," Anna shrugged. "It's just, ever since you came back, things have been different. Not bad, but different. Like, I don't know if you and Dad will ever be like you were before." Julia sat down beside Anna, taking her hand. "I don't think we can go back to what we were before. Some things just change. But that doesn't mean they can't be good in a different way." Anna looked at her with wide eyes. "Do you think it's possible for you and Dad to be happy again?" Julia's throat tightened. "I hope so, Anna. I really do." Anna smiled softly, her youthful optimism making Julia's heart ache. "I think you can do it. I think you both can." Julia kissed her daughter's forehead, grateful for her strength, but there was still a nagging doubt in her chest. Anna was right in one way, things were different. Julia had changed. But had David? Was there a way for them to rebuild something new, or had they already passed the point of no return? Later that day, Julia found herself standing in front of the family photo album, flipping through pictures of a life she once had. Pictures of a time before everything fell apart, before she left, before the hurt had set in. The faces in the pictures were familiar, but they were also distant, ghosts from a past she couldn't undo. She had thought, in her naivety, that leaving would give her the freedom she craved. The freedom to figure herself out, to escape the pressure of everyone's expectations. But instead, it had left her with a hollow ache that no amount of time could fill. As her fingers brushed over the pages, stopping on a photo of David smiling, standing next to her at their wedding, Julia couldn't help but think of all the missed moments. The years of silence. The tears, the arguments, the questions that never got answered. It wasn't enough to just hope for things to change. She had to make a choice. And this time, it couldn't be about running away. That evening, Julia found herself in the backyard, sitting by the fire pit. The flames flickered and danced in the night air, casting long shadows across the yard. She could hear the soft rustling of the trees, the crickets chirping, the world continuing to turn as though everything was fine. But inside her, nothing felt fine. David appeared on the patio doorframe, silhouetted against the kitchen light. He didn't say anything at first, he just watched her, like he was waiting for something. Julia had hoped, maybe even expected, that they would be able to talk more openly by now, but there was still this invisible wall between them. "I've been thinking," Julia said, her voice almost lost in the night. "About everything. About us." David took a few steps forward and stood beside her. "And what have you decided?" His voice was quiet, but there was a hardness to it. Julia didn't know how to answer. Could she fix this? Could they fix this? Was it even possible to go back to the beginning? To reclaim what they once had? "I don't know," she said finally, her voice soft. "But I want to try. I want to be here. For you. For Anna. For us. David remained silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the fire. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Julia. Her heart sank, but she didn't give up. Not now. Not after everything. Then let's take it one step at a time, she said, her voice filled with hope. We don't have to rush. We just have to be real with each other. David met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, Julia saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a small spark of hope. All right, he said quietly. We'll take it one step at a time. The days after that quiet conversation by the fire felt like a fragile truce between Julia and the life she had left behind. There was a tentative hope between her and David, like two people walking on a tightrope, balancing on the edge of something that could either bring them closer or tear them apart for good. But the world had a way of testing such fragile beginnings, and it didn't take long for the past to rear its ugly head. It started with a letter. Julia had been working from home when the envelope arrived. It was thick, heavier than the usual bills or junk mail, and it was addressed to her, just her, no return address, no clues as to who might have sent it. A strange chill ran down her spine when she saw it. The handwriting was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling, and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. The letter inside was simple, its message short but enough to make her blood run cold. I know what you did. And I will make sure everyone else does, too. This isn't over, Julia. The handwriting was unmistakable now. It was Rachel's. Julia stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. The words on the paper seemed to burn through her, each syllable heavy with accusation, each word carrying the weight of a betrayal she hadn't fully understood until now. Rachel. It couldn't be. Julia wanted to believe it was some twisted joke, maybe a sick prank, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. Rachel had always been straightforward, never one to hide behind shadows. If Rachel was sending this, there was something much darker at play than Julia could have ever imagined. For the first time in weeks, Julia found herself unable to think straight. She paced back and forth in the living room, trying to make sense of it all. Had Rachel been harboring these feelings all this time? Had Julia's absence, her abandonment, left a mark so deep that Rachel would go to this extent? And what did this letter mean for the fragile peace she had tried to build with David? Her thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She couldn't stay here, locked in this room. She needed answers. She grabbed her car keys and headed straight to the lake, her gut telling her to go where everything had started, to where she might find some kind of clarity. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the water, Julia found herself at the very spot where she and Rachel had once spent so many hours talking, laughing, and dreaming of the future. The air was still, the lake undisturbed by even the gentlest of breezes. But inside Julia, there was nothing still about it. Her heart raced, her mind churning with all the questions she couldn't answer. And then, there she was. Rachel stood at the edge of the water, her figure silhouetted against the glowing sunset. She hadn't heard Julia's car pull up, hadn't noticed her approach. But when Julia spoke, Rachel turned slowly, her face unreadable. You sent it, Julia said, her voice hoarse with a mixture of anger and fear. The letter. Why? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon as though she were lost in the distance. Julia could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched at her sides. You don't get to just waltz back into town and pretend everything is fine, Rachel said quietly. You left, Julia. You left us all. You left me. Julia's stomach tightened, the guilt resurfacing. She had always known that Rachel had been hurt by her departure. But hearing it now, feeling the weight of it, was something entirely different. I didn't think it would matter, Julia whispered, her words coming out as a confession. I thought leaving was the only way to save myself. I thought I needed to disappear. You didn't just disappear, Rachel snapped, her voice shaking now. You betrayed me. I needed you, Julia. And you left without even looking back. How do you think that feels? The raw emotion in Rachel's voice hit Julia like a punch to the gut. She had always thought of her departure as something she did for herself, to escape a life that had become too overwhelming. But now, standing in front of Rachel, she realized how wrong she had been. She had taken everything for granted, her family, her friends, the people who had depended on her. I know, Julia said, her voice cracking. I know I messed up. I've spent the last 10 years trying to make sense of what I did, trying to figure out how to fix it. But, sending that letter, Rachel, what does that solve? Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. It's not about solving anything. It's about making sure you understand the consequences of your actions. You don't get to walk back into my life and pretend like none of this ever happened. Julia's heart pounded in her chest. This was not the Rachel she remembered. This was a woman consumed by years of hurt and betrayal, a woman who had been left behind and had never been given the chance to heal. Please, Julia said, taking a step closer. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to make it right, but I'm trying now. I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Rachel shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. It's too late for that. You can't just come back and erase the damage you've done. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Julia wanted to say something, to beg Rachel for forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come. The realization hit her like a cold wave, some wounds couldn't be healed with just apologies. Some wounds ran too deep. Rachel turned away from her, her shoulders slumping in resignation. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Julia. And I don't think you can ever make it right. Julia watched as Rachel walked away, each step carrying with it the weight of a decade of broken trust. She felt like she was losing Rachel all over again, but this time, it was different. This time, there was no way to undo the hurt. No way to go back. As Julia stood there, staring at the empty space where Rachel had stood just moments before, she realized that she had to face the truth. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't undo the mistakes she had made. But what she could do, what she had to do, was move forward. The days after Julia's encounter with Rachel were a blur of uncertainty. She had hoped that a confrontation would lead to understanding, but instead, she had only gained more questions. What could she say to make things right? How could she even begin to fix a relationship that had been shattered for so long? She couldn't answer those questions, not yet, not when the past still clung to her like a shadow. Julia spent the next morning at the kitchen table, the sunlight pouring in through the window, casting warm patches of light on the floor. Anna sat across from her, her textbooks open, but her attention clearly elsewhere. Julia had noticed the tension in her daughter's demeanor lately, the way she'd been quieter, more withdrawn. It was as if Anna could feel the fracture in their family, even though no one had directly addressed it. Are you okay, sweetie? Julia asked gently, glancing at her daughter over the rim of her coffee cup. Anna looked up, startled, but then shrugged, offering a half-hearted smile. I'm fine, Mom. Julia frowned. She could tell Anna was holding something back. It wasn't like her to keep things bottled up, and yet, there was a distance between them, like a space that hadn't been there before. The truth was, Julia didn't just need to fix her relationship with David or Rachel, she needed to find a way to repair the bond with her daughter, too. I know things have been different, Julia started, choosing her words carefully. But I want you to know that I'm here. For you. For us. I'm trying, Anna. Anna pushed her glasses up her nose and let out a quiet sigh. I know, Mom. But it's just. I don't know. It's like nothing feels the same anymore. Julia's heart sank. Of course, Anna felt it, felt the heaviness in the air, the unresolved tension that permeated their home. Julia had wanted to protect her from the fallout of her mistakes, but she hadn't realized how deeply it had affected Anna until now. I'm sorry, Julia said softly. I didn't mean for any of this to hurt you. Anna shook her head, a frown tugging at her lips. It's not your fault, Mom. It's everything. You left, and Dad was, well, he was different. And now, you're back, and it's like we're trying to piece everything together again. But it's hard. Julia's throat tightened as she looked at her daughter. Anna was speaking the truth. They were all trying to piece things together, but the pieces didn't fit anymore. Julia didn't know how to put the puzzle back together, and every time she tried, it seemed like the image of what their family once was slipped further out of reach. Later that evening, Julia went for a walk by herself. She needed to clear her mind, to breathe without the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had become so absorbed in trying to fix her relationships with Rachel and Anna that she had almost forgotten about the one that had started it all, her relationship with David. As she walked through the neighborhood, the night air cool and crisp against her skin, Julia's thoughts drifted back to the years she had spent running. She had left David, yes, but in doing so, she had abandoned everything that had once been her life. She had thought that escaping would allow her to find herself again, but what had she truly found? More emptiness. More regret. When Julia returned home, she found David sitting in the living room, staring at the television but not really watching it. He hadn't been the same since she'd come back. His quiet demeanor, his distant gaze, made her feel like she was living with a stranger. A man who had once been so familiar to her, but now, after everything, seemed so far out of reach. David glanced up when he heard her footsteps, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. David, Julia began, her voice unsteady. Can we talk? He nodded slowly, pushing himself up from the couch. They stood there for a moment, unsure of how to bridge the distance between them. After a few moments of silence, Julia finally spoke. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix everything. I'm trying, but it feels like I'm failing. Every time I try to get closer to you, to Anna, to Rachel, it feels like the space between us just grows. David sighed and ran a hand through his hair. You're not failing, Julia. But, it's hard. You left. And when you left, it wasn't just you that you left behind. It was us. Me. Anna. We were left to pick up the pieces. And it wasn't easy. Julia felt the sting of his words, but she knew they were the truth. She hadn't just abandoned David. She had abandoned their whole family. And though she had returned, she hadn't understood how much had changed in the years she was gone. She had expected to come back and pick up where they left off, but life didn't work that way. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, Julia said, her voice barely a whisper. But I want to try to make them better. I want to fix things. I want to be with you. I don't want to keep running away from everything. David looked at her with a mixture of sadness and caution. I don't know if I can do that, Julia. I don't know if I can let you back in and pretend like nothing happened. You don't just walk away from someone for 10 years and expect everything to go back to normal. We're broken, Julia. And I don't know if we can fix that. His words hit her like a wave crashing on the shore, and Julia felt herself drowning in the truth of it. She had hoped, somehow, that time and distance could heal the wounds she had caused, but it wasn't that simple. The damage had been done, and some things couldn't be repaired with apologies alone. The days following that conversation were tense. There was no easy resolution, no simple fix. Julia and David tried to communicate, tried to rebuild, but the cracks were still there, between them, between Anna, and even between Julia and herself. As Julia lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized that the hardest part wasn't just fixing her broken relationships. It was learning to live with the fact that not everything could be mended. Not everything could be undone. The bonds between them had been stretched to the breaking point, and maybe, just maybe, there were some things that couldn't be repaired. The days following her conversation with David were like a haze of uncertainty. Every room in the house felt like a prison of memories, each corner filled with echoes of what once was. Julia tried to tell herself that she was making progress, that coming back home was the first step toward mending what she had broken. But every time she looked at David, she saw the distance that had grown between them, and every time she spoke to Anna, she felt the silent rift widening. The sun rose the next morning, casting a gentle glow over the neighborhood, but inside Julia's home, it felt as though the clouds had gathered, thick and heavy, blocking out all warmth and light. Julia stood by the kitchen counter, staring out the window as if expecting some divine answer to materialize. She didn't know what she was waiting for, an apology? An epiphany? A sign that everything would magically fall into place. But the silence that filled the house in the mornings was deafening. There were no sounds of laughter or the rustling of a newspaper being read, no footsteps racing through the hallways. Anna had taken to spending more time in her room, her interactions with Julia minimal. The strained smile she had given her at breakfast that morning still stung in Julia's heart. She glanced at the clock, 9:30 a.m. It was time to face the truth. David wasn't home. Julia had known he was going to work early, but the emptiness of the house in his absence was almost unbearable. She walked into the living room, where she found the familiar scene, the couch where they had spent so many quiet evenings together, the empty space where his shoes used to sit. It was all so empty. How had it all come to this? How had they allowed the space between them to grow so large? Julia sank into the couch, resting her head in her hands. The guilt pressed in on her like a weight, suffocating her with each breath. She had left David. She had walked away from their life together. And now she wanted to come back, but it felt as though the ground she stood on was crumbling beneath her. She thought back to their early years, when their love had been fresh and new, when everything had seemed so certain. They had built their life together, a life that had seemed unshakable. But somewhere along the way, Julia had lost herself. Somewhere in the pain, in the overwhelming weight of motherhood, of expectations, of fears, she had lost the person she used to be. And in doing so, she had lost everything that had mattered most. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps at the door. Julia stood up quickly, wiping her face, before turning toward the entrance. It was Anna, standing in the doorway with a hesitant look on her face. "Mom," Anna said, her voice quiet. Julia forced a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, sweetie. How's everything going?" Anna hesitated, then shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "It's fine, I guess. You know, school and stuff. Just, a lot going on." Julia nodded, though she knew that wasn't the full story. She could see the way Anna's eyes avoided hers, the way she tugged at the hem of her shirt nervously. There was so much that Anna wasn't saying, but Julia didn't know how to get it out of her. "Can we talk?" Julia asked softly. Anna looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing her options. Then, reluctantly, she nodded and sat down beside her mother on the couch. "I'm really sorry, Anna," Julia started, her voice breaking. "I know I've messed things up. I've hurt you, and I didn't mean to. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix me." Anna didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at her hands, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were holding something back. Finally, she sighed and looked up at her mom. "I just don't understand, Mom. You left. And I get it, sort of. You were unhappy. But when you left, it was like, you left us behind. Like we weren't enough. And now that you're back, it's like nothing's changed. We're just supposed to pick up the pieces. Like nothing happened." Anna's voice cracked with emotion. Julia's chest tightened. This was the conversation she had been dreading, the one she had feared would come sooner or later. The truth was, she had never really considered how deeply her absence had affected Anna. She had been so consumed with her own pain, with her own escape, that she hadn't thought about the damage she was causing to the people who mattered most. "I wasn't thinking about you when I left, Anna," Julia said, her voice raw. "I didn't realize how much you needed me. How much we all needed each other. I made a selfish decision, and I've spent every day since regretting it." Anna was quiet for a long time, and Julia could see the conflict written all over her face. She wanted to say something, wanted to fix this, but she didn't know how. "How do you fix something that's been broken for so long?" "I just want things to be normal again," Anna said finally, her voice soft, almost wistful. "But it's not. And I don't think it ever will be." Julia's heart shattered at her daughter's words. She wanted to tell Anna that it would get better, that everything would work out in the end. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Some things couldn't just be fixed by trying harder. Some things took time. And maybe, just maybe, some things couldn't be repaired at all. David came home later that afternoon, his face drawn and tired. The moment he walked in the door, Julia knew that something was off. His eyes avoided hers, and he didn't say anything when he saw her sitting on the couch. The silence between them had become suffocating, a constant reminder of the years lost, the pain left unresolved. "I spoke to Rachel today," Julia said, her voice tentative. David froze, his posture stiffening. "How did it go?" he asked, though there was no real curiosity in his tone, just a kind of guarded neutrality. "She's still angry," Julia replied, her voice heavy. "But I don't blame her. I don't think I can fix that." David nodded, his gaze flickering toward the door, as though he were looking for an escape. "Some things can't be fixed, Julia." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She knew that. She knew it better than anyone. But hearing them from David, hearing the resignation in his voice, felt like the final confirmation that everything she had hoped for, everything she had worked for, was slipping through her fingers. The night ended quietly, with nothing resolved. But in the silence, Julia realized something she had been avoiding. The pieces weren't going to fit back together just because she wanted them to. Rebuilding wasn't a matter of simply trying harder, it was about accepting the ashes of the past and learning how to live with them. The morning after her conversation with Anna and David, Julia woke up to the same silence. It felt like a fog had settled in, clouding everything around her. She had hoped that opening up, facing the truth, would bring some relief, but it only felt like she had taken one more step into a deeper, darker place. Julia knew the hardest part of her journey wasn't just reconciling with David or Anna, it was reconciling with herself. She stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the familiar neighborhood. The houses, the trees, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, it was all the same. But nothing felt the same. Her whole world had shifted, and no amount of nostalgia could bring back what had been lost. The truth weighed heavily on her chest, and it had nothing to do with Rachel, Anna, or David. It was about Julia, the woman who had left, the woman who had made choices that had led them all down this painful road. She had left for herself, thinking she needed to find herself again. But in doing so, she had lost everything she once held dear. "Mom." Anna's voice broke into Julia's thoughts. She turned, startled, but Anna was standing there, her eyes full of something Julia couldn't quite name. "Hey, sweetie," Julia said, offering a tired smile, but Anna didn't return it. She stood there, shifting from foot to foot, as though deciding whether to say something. I'm sorry," Anna finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julia's heart twisted. "What are you sorry for?" "For everything," Anna said, her face crumpling with emotion. "I've been angry at you. And I didn't want to be. I don't know how to make sense of all this. But I don't want to lose you again." Julia's breath caught in her throat, and she moved closer to Anna, pulling her into an embrace. "You haven't lost me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here. And I'm trying to make things right. It's just going to take time." Anna sniffled, her arms around Julia tightening. I don't know if I can forgive you right away. But I want to try. Julia squeezed her daughter tighter. We'll try together. The day passed in a blur of quiet moments, the kind that felt like progress yet weren't enough to erase the scars. Julia found herself thinking a lot about what it meant to heal, to rebuild, to face the consequences of her actions. But more than anything, she thought about the long road ahead. That evening, as David walked in from work, Julia was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. She could feel the distance between them, even now, even in the silence. It wasn't just about the things they hadn't said, it was about everything they had buried beneath the surface. David dropped his keys on the counter, glancing over at her but not making eye contact. "How's Anna?" he asked, his voice low. "She's okay. She's trying, David. We're both trying." David nodded, but Julia could see the walls he'd built around himself. It wasn't just Anna who was hesitant to forgive, David was, too. She could see it in the way he carried himself, the way he moved through their home like a ghost. She had broken him, and it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. "I know you don't want to hear this," Julia began, her voice soft, "but I'm sorry. I've said it before, but I need you to know that I'm really sorry. For leaving. For not being the person I should have been. And I know that you can't just forget everything, but I want to try, David. I want to rebuild. Even if it takes a lifetime." David didn't speak for a long moment, and Julia could feel the weight of the silence stretching between them. He finally met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that resembled hope. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Julia," David said, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can let you back in the way we used to be. But I'm willing to try. Because I don't want to lose you either." Julia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a chance, just a small one, to rebuild what had been broken. That night, as she lay in bed, Julia thought about the road ahead. She knew there were no guarantees. There were no magic words or grand gestures that could erase the pain of the past. But the truth was, sometimes, the hardest thing to do was to stay. To keep going, even when you weren't sure how it would end. It had been 10 years since she'd walked away from her family. 10 years of running, of hiding, of trying to escape the very life she had once built. But in those 10 years, she had learned something important. Running never solved anything. It only left behind more questions, more guilt, and more pain. Now, as she faced the possibility of rebuilding the life she had torn apart, Julia realized that the hardest part wasn't going to be forgiving others. It was going to be forgiving herself. The long road ahead was full of uncertainty, full of moments where she might stumble and fall. But as long as she was willing to keep walking, as long as she was willing to face the hard truths and take ownership of her mistakes, there was still hope. The road to redemption was not a straight line, but if she could find the strength to keep moving forward, there might be light at the end of the tunnel. The sun had barely risen when Julia found herself standing in the middle of her backyard, staring at the garden she had once tended to with David. It had become overgrown during the years she had been gone, the weeds creeping up through the flower beds like memories that had slowly taken over. The roses she had planted, the ones that used to bloom so vibrantly, were now sparse, their petals wilted and brown. Her fingers brushed over the rough bark of a nearby tree, and she felt the weight of the years press down on her. A decade of absence, of running, of hiding, and now here she was, trying to reclaim what had been lost. Could anything be saved? Could the garden be restored, or would she have to start fresh, planting something entirely new? Inside the house, the quiet was almost unbearable. Anna was at school, and David had gone to work early, just like the previous morning. Julia found herself alone with her thoughts again, trying to decide what to do next. It had been weeks since she had returned, weeks since their first difficult conversations. And while the walls that had once felt so suffocating had begun to crack, the space between her and David still felt vast, stretching out before her like a barren landscape. She couldn't keep waiting for everything to magically fall into place. She had to make the first move. She had to prove to herself that she was capable of change, capable of creating something new, something better. Julia had never been particularly skilled at planting anything other than flowers. But as she stood in the backyard, she realized that the garden was a metaphor for her life. It needed tending, nurturing, and most importantly, patience. She couldn't rush the process. She couldn't expect things to bloom overnight. The garden had been neglected for years, and so had she, in many ways. But now, there was a chance, a glimmer of hope, that it could all be restored. The next few days were a blur of small steps and quiet victories. Julia had started by pulling up the weeds, one by one, clearing away the remnants of the past. The process was slow, exhausting, and at times, discouraging. But with each pull of the weed, with each flick of the dirt from her hands, Julia felt a small piece of the weight she had carried for so long begin to lift. She'd also decided to start therapy. It wasn't easy, in fact, it was incredibly painful to sit down with a stranger and admit all the things she had done wrong. But there was something cathartic about it too. Talking about her fears, her regrets, and her hopes gave her a sense of release she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a cure, but it was a step. And in that moment, a small spark of hope ignited within her. One evening, about a week after starting the garden project, David came home early. Julia had been outside again, this time planting new flowers in the freshly cleared space. She was so focused on the task at hand that she didn't hear him approach until he was standing just a few feet away from her. "You've been busy," David said, his voice soft, as though not wanting to disturb her. Julia looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. She smiled, though it was tired, and wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. "I thought it was time to start fresh." David's gaze lingered on the garden for a moment before settling on her. "It looks good," he said, though the word felt almost too small for the effort she had put into it. "Thank you," she said, standing up from her crouched position. "It's a lot of work, but I think I'm finally ready to do the hard work." David didn't reply immediately, and Julia could feel the weight of his silence. She could tell he was still processing everything that had happened, the pain, the years apart. But there was something different in the air. A tentative shift, a quiet acknowledgement that they were both trying. "I'm not expecting everything to be perfect," Julia said, breaking the silence. "I know that it's going to take time, healing, trust, everything. But I'm willing to try, David. I want to build something good again. Not just for us, but for Anna too." David's expression softened, though it was still guarded. "I want to believe you. I really do. But it's not just about saying the right things. It's about showing up, every single day." Julia nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She knew that he wasn't just talking about her, but about himself too. Trust had been broken, and it couldn't be rebuilt with just words or gestures. It would take consistency. It would take showing up, day after day, despite the fear and the uncertainty. "I know," Julia replied quietly. "And I'll show up. I promise." The next morning, Julia sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee while flipping through the pages of a gardening book she had borrowed from the library. It was a small thing, learning to nurture life again, but it felt like something she could control in the midst of the chaos she had created. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she picked it up to find a text from Anna. "Can we have dinner together tonight? Just the three of us?" Julia smiled, a mix of gratitude and nervousness swirling in her chest. It wasn't the grand resolution she had hoped for, but it was a start. It was a sign that, maybe, just maybe, things could begin to shift back to where they once were, or at least, to something better than before. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, David and Anna both seemed a little more present, a little less guarded. They were talking, laughing, even if it felt awkward at times. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a beginning. And that was enough for Julia. As the days passed, Julia continued to make small changes, gradually healing the wounds she had inflicted on herself and her family. The garden began to flourish once again, each flower a reminder that new beginnings were possible, no matter how long the winter had lasted. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but Julia was finally learning that some things were worth the wait. The storm had been building for days, and it wasn't the kind of storm Julia could avoid. It was the kind that hung in the air, thick with anticipation, making every conversation feel like an earthquake waiting to happen. She could feel it deep in her bones, the tension that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to break free. It had been weeks since she'd come back, and in those weeks, things had slowly begun to improve. David had started to let his guard down. Anna had agreed to sit down for family dinners. Julia had spent countless hours working on the garden, trying to prove to herself, and to them, that she could be the person they needed her to be. But there was one thing she hadn't faced, one thing she'd been avoiding. The truth. It wasn't the kind of truth that could be hidden forever. It was the reason she left in the first place, the thing that had torn her apart and sent her running away from everything she once knew. It was a truth that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, but Julia had buried it deep, thinking that if she ignored it long enough, it would go away. But it hadn't. And now, it was time to face it. David sat across from Julia at the kitchen table that evening, his eyes focused on the unfinished glass of water in front of him. Anna was out with friends, and the house was eerily quiet. Julia could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them, making every word feel more significant than it should be. "I think it's time," Julia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't keep dancing around it. She had to say the words, even if they tore her apart. David didn't meet her eyes at first, but he nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment. "I think you're right," he said quietly. The words were like a starting gun in a race, and Julia felt her heart race with them. She had been rehearsing what she would say, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt foreign to her, distant and heavy. When I left," Julia began, her voice trembling slightly, "it wasn't just about needing space, or needing to find myself. There was more to it. I had been struggling for a long time, David, with things that I couldn't talk about. Things I didn't even understand." David's gaze remained fixed on the table, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass absent-mindedly. He wasn't interrupting, but the tension in his posture was undeniable. He was waiting for her to say the one thing he had probably suspected all along. I was having an affair," Julia said, the words feeling like they were ripping her apart as she spoke them. She could hardly believe it herself. How could she have let it go this far? How could she have let herself become this person? David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something darker, hurt. "What?" His voice cracked, and Julia could see the pain in his eyes, as though her confession had struck him in a way that words couldn't describe. "I didn't want to leave, David," Julia continued, her voice barely audible now. "I didn't want to hurt you, or Anna. But I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt so trapped by everything. I thought I was losing myself. I thought I could find a way out, even if it meant leaving you all behind. I was scared." David stared at her in silence for what felt like an eternity. His face was unreadable, but Julia could see the raw emotion in his eyes. She didn't know if it was anger, confusion, or something else, but it didn't matter. He was hurting, and she had caused it. "I didn't know who I was anymore," Julia said, almost pleading. "And I thought that running away would fix everything. But it didn't. I hurt you, David. I hurt Anna. I hurt myself." David's voice was cold, distant, when he finally spoke. "And now you want me to believe that you came back to fix it all? Just like that?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think that after everything, after you abandoned us, after you betrayed me, I should just take you back? Just like that? Julia flinched at his words, the truth of them cutting deeper than anything she had expected. She had known this moment would be painful, but hearing the hurt and disbelief in David's voice was like a punch to the gut. She deserved it. Every word. Every look. "I don't expect you to forgive me, David," Julia said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I've ruined everything. But I want to make things right. I want to prove to you and to Anna that I can be the person you both need me to be. But I can't do it alone. I can't fix this alone." David stood there for a long moment, his back to her. The silence between them felt suffocating, like a physical presence in the room. Julia held her breath, hoping, praying, that he would say something, anything. Finally, he spoke, but his words were quiet, almost inaudible. "I don't know, Julia. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. You've taken something from me that I don't know if I can ever get back." Julia nodded, her heart sinking in her chest. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but hearing the finality in David's voice was like a confirmation that things could never be the same. She had known that this moment was coming, but now that it had arrived, she realized just how deep the damage ran. Could they ever rebuild what had been shattered? Or had the weight of her mistakes become too much to bear? David left the room without another word, and Julia sat there, alone with her thoughts. She had told the truth, finally. But it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like another chapter of her life had been torn apart. The truth hadn't healed anything, it had only opened the wound even wider. As she sat in the stillness, Julia realized something. Facing the past wasn't going to be enough. She had to face herself, too. She had to learn to forgive herself, to come to terms with the fact that her mistakes had consequences. And maybe, just maybe, the only way forward was to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. The days following her confession were a blur of emotions, guilt, shame, confusion. Julia had expected the storm, but nothing could have prepared her for the silence that followed. David had retreated into himself, and Anna was distant, not knowing how to process the sudden rush of truth. Julia couldn't blame them. How could they forgive someone who had torn their lives apart so completely? The house felt like a prison. Every corner, every room, reminded her of the life she had destroyed. The past 10 years of avoidance, of running, had led her here, to a reckoning she hadn't fully understood until it was upon her. The garden she had worked so hard to restore now seemed like a mockery, a reminder of how everything she had tried to fix was only temporary. The cracks in her marriage and in her own heart ran too deep to mend with a few gestures, no matter how well-intentioned. The tension was palpable. David barely spoke to her. The few exchanges they shared were curt and loaded with the unspoken weight of everything they had lost. He no longer looked at her the way he once did, like she was the love of his life, his everything. Now, she was a stranger, a broken promise, and that realization struck harder than any of the words he had said. Julia sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, staring out the window. Anna was in her room, and David had left for work. The silence pressed down on her, the same silence that had once seemed like relief but now felt like a suffocating weight. She had expected David to be angry, but the emptiness in his eyes was worse. It was as if he didn't even know who she was anymore. She couldn't pretend things were okay. She couldn't keep going through the motions, hoping that time would heal everything. Time didn't heal wounds like this. Time only made them fester, leaving scars that never quite faded. The phone rang, pulling Julia from her thoughts. She looked at the screen and saw a number she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered, unsure of what to expect. "Hello?" she said, her voice soft. "Is this Julia?" a woman's voice asked on the other end. There was something oddly familiar about it, but Julia couldn't place it. "Yes, this is she." "Who is this?" "It's Sarah," the woman replied, her tone uncertain. I'm the one you left David for." Julia's stomach dropped. She had been expecting the aftermath of her actions to hit her from every direction, but this? This was something she had tried to forget, something she never thought would come back to haunt her. I'm sorry, Julia said, her voice shaky. I didn't know. No, I understand, Sarah interrupted. You were a mess, and I'm not trying to make this harder for you. I just wanted to tell you something. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not David. Julia took a breath, trying to steady herself. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, Sarah replied, her voice gentle but firm. But I think you need to know something. I never thought David was the right person for me. I know you think I took him away from you, but I'm not the one who made him walk away from everything. He did that long before you left. And when you did leave, I think he felt like his whole life fell apart. But he wasn't ready to face that, so he buried it all, just like you did. Julia's heart sank, the weight of Sarah's words hitting her like a tidal wave. For years, she had blamed Sarah for everything. She had convinced herself that if Sarah hadn't entered their lives, if she hadn't been there, David would have never looked away. But now, the truth was staring her in the face. Sarah wasn't the cause of their problems. Their problems had existed long before Julia ever left. I didn't, Julia started, her voice faltering. I didn't realize. I thought. I know, Sarah said, her voice soft. We always think we know what's best, don't we? But sometimes, the person we hurt the most is ourselves. Julia didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time blaming Sarah, and now, here she was, talking to her, someone who, despite everything, seemed to understand more than Julia ever had. She felt a strange sense of connection to her, a bond built on shared pain. I never meant to hurt him, Julia whispered, the tears finally breaking through. I never meant to hurt anyone. I know, Sarah replied. But maybe, just maybe, this is the chance to make things right. For both of you. After hanging up, Julia sat in silence, her thoughts racing. It was the first time in years that someone had told her the truth in a way that didn't feel like a judgment or an accusation. Sarah had spoken with a kindness that Julia hadn't expected, a kindness that allowed her to finally see things as they truly were. David hadn't been the man she thought he was when she left. He hadn't been the man she remembered. He was someone who had been hurt, too, someone who had been broken long before she ever walked away. And that realization hit her harder than anything else. Julia stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. She wasn't sure what she would say to David, but she knew one thing, she couldn't run anymore. She couldn't keep pretending that things could be fixed with a few apologies. She had to face the damage she had done, and if there was any hope left, she had to start by forgiving herself. David came home that evening, and the house was quieter than usual. He hadn't said much when he came through the door. He was still distant, still processing the bombshell Julia had dropped on him. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. She waited until he had sat down at the table, still not meeting her eyes. Then, she spoke, her voice clear and steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. I'm sorry, David. I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for what I did. And I'm sorry for what I didn't do. I blamed you, but I never saw the full picture. I never saw how much you were hurting, how much you were struggling. I've been running from everything, including myself. David finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. And now? What happens now? I don't know, Julia replied honestly. But I want to try. I want to rebuild whatever is left of us. But I can't do it alone. I can't fix this on my own, and I know that now. David nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. But for the first time in weeks, he didn't look at her like she was a stranger. There was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe something else. The days after that conversation felt like a delicate dance, one where every step forward seemed to bring with it the potential for a misstep, a reminder of everything that had been broken. Julia and David had talked, and for the first time in a long while, their words were laced with a thread of hope. It was fragile, like a seed just beginning to sprout, but it was there. They had decided, together, to take things slow. No grand gestures, no sudden fixes. They would rebuild, piece by piece, but only if they were both committed to the work. There was no magic solution, no fast-forward button to bypass the hurt, but at least they were trying. Julia spent the next few weeks doing what she could to make amends. She wasn't sure what it would take to heal the wounds she had inflicted, but she knew she had to start with actions, not just words. She began by re-engaging with Anna in a way that didn't feel forced. They spent time together, going out for walks or cooking dinner together, simple things that, at one point, had seemed so normal. But for Anna, it wasn't that simple. Julia could see the hesitation in her daughter's eyes, the way she held back, unsure of where to place her trust. Julia couldn't blame her. She had abandoned Anna when she needed her most. Julia's absence had left a gap in Anna's life, and no matter how many dinners they shared now, the damage had been done. It would take time, and Julia knew it. But she was determined to keep trying. David, too, was distant, though less so than he had been before. Julia could tell he was still working through his feelings, still unsure whether he could ever fully forgive her, or if he even wanted to. But there were small moments that gave her hope. When he walked into the kitchen to ask how her day was, or when he touched her arm lightly, as though testing the waters. These were the subtle signs that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to rebuild. Yet, they both knew the road ahead would be long. Trust was not something that could be restored overnight, and the scars of the past 10 years were not easily erased. Julia would have to prove, day by day, that she was worthy of their forgiveness, and that she could be the person they both needed her to be. One evening, after Anna had gone to bed, Julia found herself alone with David in the living room. He was sitting in his usual spot, the one by the window where he used to read after dinner. His book lay unopened on his lap, his fingers tapping restlessly on the cover. Julia took a deep breath and approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to talk to him, again. They couldn't keep avoiding the hard conversations. "David," she began, her voice soft, but steady. "I need to tell you something." He glanced at her, his expression guarded. "What is it?" Julia hesitated, trying to find the right words. This wasn't something she could say lightly, but it was something she had to say, if they were going to move forward. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, the time I was gone, the mistakes I made. And I realize now that I left because I was afraid. I was afraid of being vulnerable, of letting anyone in. But I see now that shutting you out, shutting Anna out, was the worst thing I could have done. I should have trusted you, trusted us. I should have let you in." David didn't respond right away. He just sat there, his fingers still lightly tapping on the book. Julia waited, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't keep holding everything inside. "I don't know how to forgive you, Julia," David finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I don't know if I ever will. But I do know this, I'm not giving up on us. Not yet." Julia felt her chest tighten, the weight of his words sinking in. He was willing to try, even though the hurt was still there, even though the trust had been shattered. That was more than she had hoped for, but it was also a reminder of just how much they had lost, and how much they still had to work for. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," Julia replied, her voice steady. "I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll prove to you that I can be the person you need me to be, even if it takes time." David looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as though looking for some sign of sincerity. Julia held his gaze, determined to show him that she was committed to this, committed to them. That night, as they sat in silence together, Julia realized something. Healing wasn't about grand gestures or quick fixes. It was about showing up every day, being present, and giving each other the space to grow and heal in their own time. There would be setbacks, there would be moments of doubt, but as long as they both kept trying, there was a chance. And that was enough, for now. The following weeks were a mixture of progress and struggle. Julia spent hours talking with Anna, trying to understand the hurt she had caused. There were difficult moments when Anna's anger boiled to the surface, but slowly, they began to rebuild their relationship. Julia didn't expect everything to be perfect right away, but each small step forward felt like a victory. David, too, began to let his guard down. They talked more, though the conversations were still tentative, like two people trying to learn each other again. Julia knew it wouldn't be easy, but with each small moment of connection, whether it was a laugh over breakfast or a quiet moment on the porch, she felt a flicker of hope. As the days passed, Julia came to realize that the healing wasn't just happening between her and David. It was happening within her, too. She was learning to forgive herself, to let go of the guilt and shame that had been weighing her down for so long. It was a slow process, but it was happening. She knew the road ahead was uncertain. There would be more moments of pain, more moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving in the right direction, toward healing, toward hope, and maybe, just maybe, toward a future where they could all be whole again. The sun was setting over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light through the windows. Julia stood in the living room, looking out at the garden she had once spent so much time tending to. It was the same garden, but everything felt different now. The flowers were blooming again, the grass was lush and green, and the air smelled of fresh earth and possibility. It felt like a symbol, a fresh start, a new chapter. She hadn't expected to feel this way. After everything that had happened, after the pain, the mistakes, and the hurt, she didn't know how it was possible to feel this much hope. But here she was, standing on the edge of something new. David joined her, his footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. He stood next to her, his gaze following hers out the window, though his thoughts seemed far away. She could feel the quiet tension between them, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence it had once been. It was the kind of silence that came after all the words had been said, after all the apologies had been made, and now there was only the quiet space left to fill with the weight of what they had both chosen to carry forward. "I've been thinking," David said, his voice low, as though he was carefully choosing each word. "About everything. About us. I don't want to hold on to the past anymore. I don't want to keep looking back, blaming either of us for what happened. It's time to look forward." Julia turned to face him, her heart skipping in her chest. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't hurt in the same way. There was a new resolve in his voice, one that she hadn't heard before. He was speaking to her, not as the man she had left, not as the man who had suffered, but as someone who was ready to move on. And for the first time, she saw the possibility of a future where they could both heal and grow together. "I feel the same," Julia replied softly. "I don't want to keep carrying all that guilt and regret. It's time to let it go. We can't undo the past, but we can choose what we do with the future." David nodded slowly, taking her hand in his. "We don't have to have everything figured out right now. We don't have to know what the next 10 years will look like. But we can start fresh. We can rebuild, piece by piece." Julia smiled, her eyes filling with tears, not from sorrow, but from a deep, quiet relief. She had been so afraid of the future, so terrified that it would be defined by the past. But now, standing here with David, she saw the possibility. She saw the opportunity to start again. It wasn't easy. The first few months after that conversation were still filled with moments of uncertainty. There were times when doubt crept in, when the weight of their past threatened to pull them backward. But they had made a choice, and they held on to that choice with everything they had. They didn't need to forget what had happened, they needed to learn from it. They needed to build something new, something stronger. And they were willing to put in the work, even when it felt hard, even when the temptation to retreat was strong. Anna, too, was beginning to find her way back. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when the hurt would flare up, but slowly, she started to trust Julia again. There were still misunderstandings, still times when the words didn't come easily, but they were moving forward together. Julia had spent a lot of time thinking about what kind of mother she wanted to be. She couldn't change the past, but she could be present now. She could be the mother Anna needed, the one who listened and understood, the one who didn't run away. And slowly, their relationship began to heal, too. One evening, as the three of them sat down for dinner, David, Julia, and Anna, Julia looked around the table, her heart full. It wasn't the same as before, but it didn't need to be. They were different people now. They had been through the fire, and they had come out the other side. "We've come a long way," Julia said, her voice filled with emotion. "I know it hasn't been easy, and I know it won't be perfect. But we're here. We're together." Anna looked up from her plate, her eyes meeting Julia's. There was a softness there, a tentative smile that Julia hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm glad you're here, Mom," Anna said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I know it's been hard, but I think we're okay." Julia's heart swelled in her chest. She reached across the table, taking Anna's hand, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were okay. They were going to be okay. David smiled at her, his hand resting gently on hers. "We're going to make it through this. Together." The days ahead were still filled with challenges, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. Julia and David had learned that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. They would continue to take it one step at a time, supporting each other along the way. They had learned to forgive, not just each other, but themselves. And in doing so, they had unlocked the possibility of something even greater than they had imagined, a future where they were free to love, free to grow, and free to choose a new path, together. As Julia looked out at the garden one last time, the flowers blooming before her eyes, she realized something. A new beginning wasn't something you could force, something you could plan or control. It came when you were ready to let go of the past, to step forward with an open heart, and to trust that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She was ready. They were ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?